Superheroes who stand the test of time tend to have iconic villains to go up against. There's usually one foe that jumps to one's mind first, an arch nemesis. However, that doesn't mean that the more recognizable villain is always the first one that hero has gone up against frequently. Such is the case for Superman. When people think of the Man of Steel's arch nemesis, they usually jump to Lex Luthor. And Lex has been around for a long time. He debuted in 1940 in Action Comics 23, with his luscious head of red hair and planned to set the nations of the world at each other's throats and rise to power in the resulting power vacuum. However, before Lex, there was another villain, and this one was one that Superman fought over and over again, many times. One could say he was Superman's first Golden Age nemesis, and that was the Ultra Humanite. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and let's take a look at the brief period in the Golden Age when Superman went up against the Ultra Humanite. Originally not given a civilian identity, the Ultra Humanite, or just Ultra for short, debuted in 1939 in Action Comics 13, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And originally he was not a giant albino ape. That would come years later. At first he was a bald or balding, depending upon which issue you were reading, mad scientist. He was also depicted as middle-aged and in a wheelchair. From the start, the Ultra Humanite is established as a master manipulator, someone who works behind the scenes. In his first adventure, he is revealed to be pulling the strings of Jackie Reynolds, head of a cab protection league, which is trying to extort money out of independent cab companies. It's a classic protection racket. Superman puts a stop to Reynolds' efforts, but then he's reading the paper and sees that Reynolds has escaped, and he's done so with the aid of poison gas, and Clark feels that's just a bit above his pay grade.
Poison gas? That seems just a little too ingenious for Reynolds to have figured out for himself. I'd better look into this.
He's not wrong. Reynolds is not slick at all. He finds him quite easily in a cabin in the woods because he kept the police car that he stole while he was escaping and just parked it beside it. It's in this cabin here where Superman first encounters the Ultra Humanite. The fiery eyes of the paralyzed cripple burn with terrible hatred and sinister intelligence. So we meet at last, eh? It was inevitable that we should clash.
Who are you?
The head of a vast string of evil enterprises. Men like Reynolds are but my henchmen. You have interfered frequently with my plans, and it is time for you to be removed.
If what you say is true, then thanks for giving me the opportunity to capture you.
You may not find that task as simple as it appears on the surface. You may possess unbelievable strength, but you are pitting yourself against a mental giant. I am known as the Ultra Humanite. Why? Because a scientific experiment resulted in my possessing the most agile and learned brain on Earth. Unfortunately for mankind, I prefer to use this great intellect for crime. My goal? Domination of the world. How many times do you think he practiced that speech? I enjoy that he looks like a different person in the first and last panels, even in this monologue. The fact that the Ultra Humanite is paralyzed doesn't come into play too much in this era, except at the start as a contrast to Superman's physical prowess and also Ultra's intellect. It would be many decades before some authors endeavor to do more with it. But the bones are laid here, especially because Ultra is going to be a body swap foe. So over time, much will be made/examined about why he chooses the bodies he ends up in. There are many interesting avenues to go down in that regard, and him being paralyzed at the start does open up some of them. But in the Golden Age, it's left alone as an accenting character detail, and again there they don't do much with it, they just note it. It may have been meant to elicit certain feelings, but if so, what it's meant to elicit has faded over time, as perceptions surrounding disability have changed. Ultra is able to knock Superman out using an extremely strong electrical current, and he has a Bond villain trap ready, or rather, since we're pre-Bond, I guess Bond has Ultra Humanite traps. He ties Superman to a table and has him heading to a saw to be sawed in half, but Superman is invulnerable to that, and so his skin shatters the saw. One of Ultra's henchmen is killed by the shards, gets him right in the neck. The Golden Age went hard. Superman's on the loose, so Ultra gets his henchmen to help him escape. They try and do this via plane. The Ultra Humanite's vessel crumples sickeningly as it strikes the ground with a thunderous crash. Superman has no chill.
Strange, I can't find any trace of the Ultra Humanite. Well, that finishes his plan to control the Earth. Or does it?
No, it doesn't. He's back the next issue. This time he's behind the collapse of a subway because he's involved himself with some building companies and encouraged them to use substandard building materials. Superman follows some of the implicated people back as they flee, but that's just what Ultra wanted. He has a trap set up. It's a tank filled with crystal, liquid crystal. The two thugs wheel the crippled Ultra Humanite into the room. And that is the end of Superman.
You're the only man on Earth who could have done it.
Behold my mortal foe, imprisoned in crystal, so that I can look upon him and laugh until eternity. The Ultra Humanite's doing a lot of things first. This is essentially carbonite. When he destroyed my plane, he thought I too had been eliminated. But unknown to Superman, I escaped with a parachute. He alone stood between me and my great goal, domination of the Earth. Now I can hasten my plans unhampered.
Good for you, Ultra. I love how supportive his subordinates are. Like, good for you, Ultra, live your truth.
Superman, of course, escapes. All he does is flex to get out of the crystal, but the Ultra Humanite also escapes. Appearing next in Action Comics 17. This time he's back to extortion of a company running cruise ships. We are so early in Superman's canon that the Daily Planet isn't called that yet. It's still the Daily Star. When Clark reaches his destination, he finds the Clarion has settled upon its side and investigators are about to board it.
I'm from the Daily Star. May I accompany you on board?
No, get out of here. I mean, if you wish. Clark investigates and learns more and more about this extortion deal that's being run. The Clarion is the fourth ship of our line to have been deliberately destroyed thus far. We've managed to keep it quiet.
Whew, what a yarn, but why the silence?
Unknown gang has contacted us demanding 5 million or they will continue their evil work.
5 million? At least they aren't pikers.
Wow, that really must make him feel a lot better. Soon a call comes in demanding more money and Clark listens in, but he can't recognize the voice. Really, Clark? Ultra monologues all the time and he hasn't even swapped bodies yet. There's no excuse. Ultra, mad scientific genius, adjusts the miraculous invention with which he can cut in on any telephone line without physical contact. If I'm going to continue my costly subversive activities, I've got to get capital, huge sums of it, at once. Now Superman, of course, has to get involved in this money exchange. And before you know it, he's busting in, and it's Ultra Humanite versus Superman yet again. Arrived precisely at the moment I expected you. For a man possessing super strength, you show an amazing lack of intuition. I've been expecting you, Superman, and I am prepared.
Then try and stop me from appropriating that money.
Another step, and I'll discharge this acid gun at you. I fancy this powerful solvent should have an effect even upon your super tough skin. Abruptly, the Man of Tomorrow lunges directly toward the crippled scientist's figure and crashes against an invisible barrier.
What?
What you've just encountered is a panel of transparent, unbreakable metal, a creation of my own. What now, Superman? Transparent, unbreakable metal. So was the acid gun gonna have to eat through that first and then get to Superman? Superman breaks through this transparent barrier, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, Ultra was never there. That was a hologram. What a fake out. So Clark vows that next time he'll get Ultra, but at least he broke up his latest scheme. Superman will get his next chance to fail at taking down Ultra in Action Comics 19. And this issue is where Ultra gets really interesting. Up until this point, wheelchair aside, he was very much your standard mad scientist in terms of his inventions and death traps, and that was mixed with a level of master manipulator. Even if those things never fully felt like they fused together. The hows and whys of the schemes he was picking, they never quite matched with the end climactic battles you would get with Superman, where all of a sudden it was just surprise gadgets and the like. But issue 19 sees Ultra feeling like he's coming into his own a bit. He's got the most cohesive plot he's had up to this point. The story opens with the spread of mysterious plague, the Purple Death, and it's really serious. It's living up to its name. The new disease without warning spreads like wildfire. People drop right and left on the streets until the majority of Metropolis are afraid to leave the dubious safety of their homes. Daily, the streets are clogged with death wagons carting away load upon load of putrefying corpses. Horror grips the city. Purple plague grips Metropolis. Takes terrible toll. By Clark Kent. You know they made it purple so that they could make that alliteration. Now, scientist Henry Travers believes that he can invent an antidote. He's going to based off of the bubonic plague or the Black Death. But he's then kidnapped because he's getting too close, and this by Ultra, who's the person who engineered the plague. Superman, eh? So he dares to interfere again. No freak of nature will stop me from achieving my goal. The human race shall be blotted out so that I can launch a race of my own, and no one, nothing shall prevent it. Ultra manages to capture Superman and uses a mind control helmet to bend him to his will. You will assist my men. Spread the purple plague.
Yes, master.
But psych, Superman was just pretending. It takes more than a fancy helmet to control the Man of Steel. As for Ultra, he gets blasted by one of his own rays. This one he was attempting to blast Superman. And so it seems like this is the end of Ultra. But it's not, and the Ultra Humanite will be given the twist that will come to define his character. And that starts next issue, which builds out to our reveal. Again, it's a very strong issue for the Ultra Humanite. We open issue 20 with actress Dolores Winters nearly being assassinated on set, and she's saved by Clark. He's there as himself, so he saves her as Clark. And as a result, he asks if he can have an exclusive interview, and she says yes. But when he shows up that night for said interview, suddenly she doesn't want to do it or even see him. And she's very cold to him. I'm not the slightest bit interested in being interviewed, and so good evening. That evening, as Clark retires,
I save her life, then she slams the door in my face? It doesn't make sense. Females are a puzzle, movie queens in particular.
Clark is really put out by this, to the point that when she suddenly announces her retirement and that she's throwing a party on a yacht, he's not even curious, he just doesn't want to go. So salty.
So she's going to throw a big farewell party on her yacht tonight. Well, I'm not interested. I'll just forget she ever existed.
Is this the first person you ever backed out of an interview? Jeez. Meanwhile, on the boat. Tell us, Dolores, why are you quitting the screen? You love your work so much, it's strange you'd walk out on it. It's really quite simple. Money was my goal, I have achieved enough of it, and so I'm quitting. Sounds legit, but suddenly Dolores commandeers the boat. She takes everyone hostage, and then it's time to, of course, demand a ransom. Now the ransom she wants for all these celebrities on this yacht, $5 million. That was the same amount as for those cruise ships. That should have been the real tip-off. Bet Clark wishes he'd gone to this party now. Dolores gets the ransom and reveals she never intends to let any of them live, but Superman tracked the money, and so it's showdown time. Snatching a lighted torch from the walls, Dolores waves it towards the faces of her captives. Back, or I'll burn your faces to a crisp. No!
I believe you'd actually do it.
Superman has a sudden burst of intuition.
Those evil blazing eyes, there's only one person on this earth who could possess them. Ultra!
Superman is annoyed. He felt for sure he'd seen Ultra die for real last time. My assistants finding my body revived me via adrenaline. However, it was clear that my recovery could be only temporary. And so, following my instructions, they kidnapped Dolores Winters yesterday and placed my mighty brain in her young, vital body. This is a fascinating moment in the Ultra Humanite's history for a couple of reasons. One, because it is the first body swap, and that is going to become a staple for the character. The other is the fact that he picks this body. Decades later, many are going to get hung up on or deal with this in different ways. The hows and whys of Ultra choosing Dolores Winters as a host body. Some find it more perplexing than the fact that he eventually chose a giant albino ape. For this era, this is the explanation we're getting. Dolores, young and vital. Ultra doesn't go into rich and beautiful, although they are also factors that he used to his advantage in this heist. They deal with this the most overtly in the 80s, where Ultra will make statements about the fact that ultimately he always feels like himself. It's just whichever body is advantageous for the time. Ultra is Ultra. Although again, some have played with the various explanations. For this issue, Ultra escapes to hatch another evil scheme another day, which is the very next issue. But that is also the end of the Golden Age Humanite appearing in the actual Golden Age, and not in throwback stories. We'll get to that in a moment. So what's the plan for 21? Well, Ultra, still in the body of Dolores Winters, learns of Terry Curtis, courtesy of an article written by Clark Kent for the Daily Star, and sees that Curtis is making an atomic disintegrator. In a distant spot, Ultra, who had miraculously survived her last encounter with Superman, reads the article with interest. An atomic disintegrator? If I had it in my possession, nothing could stop me. Nothing. And so begins Operation Seduce Terry Curtis. Ultra stages a cat rescue. Look at all the leg as he saves her pussycat. Half an hour later, the two have become very well acquainted. I'm so interested in your work on this atomic disintegrator. Won't you tell me more about it?
I'll tell you more about it when we get together tomorrow night. Same place, same time.
Curtis is convinced that he is dating a Dolores Winters lookalike, and he is thrilled. But this courtship doesn't last very long because Ultra can't wait. Ultra can't be stealthy, needs the atomic disintegrator right now.
Why? What are you doing here? How did you find the place?
Never mind, the fact is that I'm here. Aren't you pleased? But later, as Dolores attempts to steal a copy of Curtis's plans.
Put down that paper.
What do you mean?
Don't pretend innocence. I saw you steal those papers from the table. What's your game?
Come in, men.
Okay, Ultra.
I know they're probably not, but I like to imagine that they are the same henchmen. Ultra brings Curtis to the torture ring, gets the info she needs, and now it's time to ransom the city. Again. Within her hideaway, Ultra is broadcasting a strange message to the city of Metropolis. Hear me. $2 million is to be delivered to me, or else I will destroy your city and every living soul in it. As a sample of my power, I will destroy the Wentworth Tower at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Hey, that's less money than it was for the boat full of celebrities. Once more, Superman to the rescue, but this time Ultra has robots, which he defeats. But he is still manipulated by Ultra, who says sure, he can have Curtis if he steals some crown jewels for her. Then turns around and tells the world that Superman is about to steal. Diabolical. Officials of Metropolis, here's interesting news for you. Superman is going to attempt to steal the crown jewels from the Reynolds building. Thought you'd be interested. It'll be interesting to observe what occurs when the Man of Steel meets their resistance. Of course, our hero triumphs, and it looks like Ultra plummets into the center of a volcano. When they reach the city's edge,
it all seems to have been a terrible nightmare. Well, leave it go at that. Forget you ever succeeded in disrupting the atom. Farewell.
The end. Thanks, 1940. Can you tell what concerns are being worked through in this issue? And that was the end of the Ultra Humanite going up against Superman on a regular basis. And the Ultra Humanite vanishes after that for decades. For some reason, Ultra didn't really catch on at this time. Luthor, who debuts just 2 issues later, would go on to leave a far more lasting impression over time and take on the Nemesis position for the Man of Steel. Despite appearing in many issues in rapid succession, the Ultra Humanite didn't make the strongest impression on readers for quite some time. In fact, that only occurs when the albino ape form is introduced, and that was in Justice League of America 195 in 1981, so deep into the Bronze Age. The Ultra Humanite Greetings, old and new friends. Do not be deceived by my somewhat bizarre appearance. Within this apish skull, there is a brain as human as your own. Though I admit mine is evolutionarily far more advanced, still we have not gathered here to discuss me. We are here for a common purpose, which I shall now describe.
I've heard of the Ultra Humanite. He fought Superman years ago and almost defeated him half a dozen times. Some say he's smarter even than Lex Luthor.
That was the name that Lex used to go by early in the Golden Age, and so hence also on Earth 2, which is where the Ultra Humanite would settle.
Cause even Luthor never had the ability to transplant his own brain into other bodies. Nobody knows how many people the Ultra Humanite has been. Not even him. Finally, he got disgusted with having a body that was so much weaker than his mind, so he mutated an ape until it had a skull big enough to contain his brain, and then he transplanted himself for the last time. Now shut up! I want to hear what he's got to say.
I mean, come on. I want to hear what he has to say too.
Because in the Silver Age there was essentially a reboot with new characters, it resulted in there being a splitting of the Earths based on the different heroic eras. Ultra would be acknowledged as a villain for Golden Age Superman who resided on Earth 2, because at that point the Silver Age heroes lived on Earth 1. And so there would be some more stories. You could see things like Ultra in the body of a T-Rex, Ultra in the body of a giant ant. The latter is from the backup series Mr. and Mrs. Superman, which were stories about Clark and Lois's life as a married couple on Earth 2. They were a lot of fun. It's in one of those stories from Superman Family 201 where Ultra explains to a captured Bruce Wayne how she survived falling into a volcano, which is good because I had questions. As I planned, I leaped into a volcano crater to escape into a special heat-proof cylinder I had previously prepared.
Oh no, the Ultra Humanite has as many plans as Batman.
Ultra wants Bruce Wayne's body in this story. I'm not asking, Mr. Wayne. I'm taking over your body as the new home of my superior brain. Because you are Bruce Wayne, head of a vast financial and industrial empire. The one thing I've always wanted is world domination. With your wealth holdings, your connections, I'll reach that ultimate goal.
Actually, if Ultra got that body and then realized Bruce was Batman, he would have had a real chance at doing that.
Following Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, when Superman's backstory was retconned and all Earths were rolled into one, the Ultra Humanite was firmly established as a foe of the JSA, the Justice Society of America. And this continuity, Superman had appeared after that time. And then Superman series, there was another kind of Ultra Humanite that appeared, but it wasn't the same person. They spelled Ultra like U.L.T.R.A. It turned into a cheerleader cheer in my head there for a minute. Give me a U. The closest Superman would come to having Ultra as a nemesis again would actually be in the New 52, the line-wide reboot from 2011. In this continuity at the start, the Ultra Humanite would be reimagined as a parasitic alien from the Phantom Zone that first attacked Clark as a child. But later in the New 52, the more classic version of Ultra Humanite, but again we're going back to the giant ape body, would be introduced on Earth 2. However, we would be using some of the post-crisis continuity that had been added to the Ultra Humanite because he was still being expanded upon even if he was now a villain for the JSA. So he had a name at this point, Gerard Shugel, which was an homage to his creators Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. And in Rebirth, that continuity was re-established, or most of it. And so he'll pop up in places as needed. The canon's pretty loose right now, so it varies. One time he was Solomon Grundy, then he was back to being an ape. John fought him at one point. It's really interesting to see that the original Ultra Humanite didn't catch on as an arch foe for Superman. There is a lot of evolution going on in Superman's early lore, and at the start, Ultra's adventures are a bit random in terms of it's hard to discern the bones of an Ultra plot from any other villain. They're kind of anything, except that they usually involve extortion in some way, and usually for $5 million or $2 million. But it's less on theme than, say, the Joker over in Batman's comics, where he quickly established a clear motif. Some of Ultra's traits, down to the physical appearance, end up going to Lex. Not that bald/balding super scientist villain was a rarity for Siegel and Shuster. It was a go-to for them, actually. The first Superman story, which had the character as a villain, had that design. The similarities between Lex and Ultra would be commented upon years later in an Elseworld story called Generations. In that story, it would be explained that Lex had actually always been the Ultra Humanite, that the Ultra Humanite had swapped bodies with Lex, who had been an underling for him. But as for Ultra's first base traits, the desire to take over the world was standard, and the evil scientist was also a go-to. It simply seems that all of the concepts that would make Ultra interesting wouldn't fully come together until later on. But there are some very interesting ideas present in the Golden Age that aren't highlighted as much in the modern era, and they're strong, and they should be. And one of those ideas is the core one, that the Ultra Humanite is the Ultra Humanite, no matter the body. That panel in Action Comics 20, where Superman is able to identify Ultra because of the sheer evil inside, is a very powerful one. Ultra's core self doesn't change, regardless of the body, and indeed the lack of real attachment to the body and more how the body can serve either Ultra's purposes or or ego is an interesting trait. It's unique, and someone actually wanting to be a giant albino ape, it certainly sticks with you. It's why once that form is introduced, it becomes the default. When you bring Ultra Humanite back to base at this point, it's to that body, not back to the original one. Not unless you're doing a flashback of some kind. Or you're that one Power Girl series with that storyline with Ultra Humanite and Satana that most people ignore. Now this idea of Ultra being just Ultra has been conveyed recently time for recording, and that was in Stargirl.
You really saw me in here, didn't you? That's unfortunate.
An albino gorilla.
A body powerful enough to destroy the entire JSA. After a few modifications, of course.
It was a good show. The giant albino ape form really matches and amplifies Ultra's uniqueness. It helps differentiate the villain. Sometimes a change made years later to a character is what makes them stand out, especially with some who debuted in the Golden Age. There's a tendency around the Golden Age characters. Sometimes they're almost perfect right out the gate. One just needs to make little tweaks or add small details to flesh them out. Other times they need a complete overhaul. And then of course they're the ones that just fade into obscurity and nothing is done with them at all. The Ultra Humanite evolved over time, but by the time they were firmly established, they had also established links to other heroes and villain groups, and the connection to Superman felt even more distant, reinforced by the roster of standard villains Superman now faced. Still, these early stories are interesting, and the idea of a young, less established Superman going up against an Ultra Humanite who has yet to achieve full notoriety is a fun one. The fact that it took so long for the Ultra Humanite to find a firm position within DC also means that there are lots of interesting tangents surrounding the character. Questions, answers, and of course conflicting origins and continuities. My favorite thing. Dolores Winters even became an actual character, although now the spelling of her name was different. It's Dolores and not Dolores now. Cuz Ultra is kind of floating around time of recording, and his days of being Superman's nemesis are long gone. Where he'll end up, time will tell. But I want to hear from you. What do you think of the battles between Golden Age Superman and the Ultra Humanite? Do you think he would have been a good nemesis for the Man of Steel? If you could transplant your brain into another body, would you? Share your thoughts down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell case so that you never miss a vid. If you enjoy what I do here, then check out my Ko-fi where I post some extra content. It helps support the channel. I, as always, appreciate you taking some time of your day to spend discussing comics with me, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.